Good morning, Kahal Kadosh. Beruchim Abayim to everybody. Today, Erev Shabbat Kodesh, Perashat Chukat, Makam Husseini, the 9th day of Tammuz, corresponding to the 8th day of July. At the Edmond J. Safra Synagogue, special breakfast graciously sponsored today by Mr. Josi Safdiye and family, Le'ilui Nishmat, his beloved father, Obadiah ben Bahie Alav Shalom, a great community activist, Askan Siburi of the Serbian community in Argentina, as well as for his uncle, Yaakov ben Bahie Alehem Shalom. Additionally, today's class, generously sponsored, Le'ilui Nishmat, Mr. Joseph Chera Alav Shalom, Yosef ben Mazal. Additionally, today's class, graciously sponsored by Mr. Daniel Betesh and family, Le'ilui Nishmat, his father, Ramon Lolo Betesh, Rahamim ben Rene Alav Shalom. Additionally, today's class, dedicated for the Refuah Shelema of Vanessa Matilde Bat Mabel Diana and Leah Bat Sara, among the Holim of Am Israel. Yesterday we left and a topic pending concerning the final segment of Perashat Chukat. At the end of the Perashah, the Torah discusses two wars. One war concerning Sihon, the king of the Emori. The Emori nation was one of the 7 nations that was living in Eretz Israel prior to the conquering of the land through Yoshua bin Nun. And also, the Torah discusses the war against Og Melech Bashan. Concerning the first war, Sihon, the king of the Emori, we know the happy ending of that mini war. But when it comes to the war against Og Melech Bashan, suddenly we see a concept concerning Moshe Rabbeinu not very commonly seen. And if you allow me to read quickly the pasuk that says, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Borei Olam speaks to Moshe, and it says, Al tira oto. Don't fear him. Ki biyadecha natati oto, because in your hands I gave you him, be'et kol amo, and his entire nation, be'et arso, and his entire land. Now the pasuk discusses about the fear of Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is not something common that we see, that there is a commandment for Moshe to fulfill, to activate, to defend Bnei Israel, and suddenly Moshe Rabbeinu is afraid. Rashi, obviously, the foremost commentator of the Perashah, obviously picks on this statement, and it says, you know what was the reason of Moshe Rabbeinu being afraid of defeating or winning the war against Og Melech Bashan, the king of Bashan? Shema ta'amod lo zechuto shel Avraham. Maybe the zechut of Avraham Avinu will shield Og. So obviously, Og Melech Bashan was not a saint. He was actually a troublemaker, a fellow that God gifted him an exorbitant amount of years in this world. And there are many opinions how old was Og. But I'll tell you just a simple calculation. According to our commentaries in the Perashah, back in Sefer Bereshit, Og was one of the survivors of the Mabul, of the flood, by hanging out from the external area of the ark. So yes, the Torah tells us Noah and his wife, his 3 sons and 3 daughter-in-laws, those were the people inside of the Teva. But there was one hanging individual, a giant according to many opinions, outside of the Teva, and this was Og, that eventually becomes very instrumental later on in the life of Abraham Avinu. What does Og comes to tell Abraham? Abraham, just be aware that your nephew Lot, or brother-in-law according to other opinions, has been kidnapped. This is about the war between the 4 and 5 kings in the time of Abraham. Now, to everyone listening to this statement, it seems that Og was a very nice person who informs Abraham that his nephew Lot has been kidnapped, but according to the deeper Sepharim, Og had one intention, that Abraham will go to war, will be defeated, will be most likely captured and executed, and then he will be able to take Sara as a wife. That was the marvelous reason, or the diabolic reason perhaps, that Og informed Abraham Avinu about the whereabouts of Lot. When Abraham came back as a winner of that war, so to speak, and Lot is rescued and redeemed and saved by Abraham, Og is not a happy camper. He is the one later on in life that tells Sara about the Akedah. And when he describes to her the details of how Abraham Avinu bounded his son Ishaq and did whatever he was doing in the Akedah, at that moment, without knowing the end, that the Akedah, actually the sacrifice, never took place, at that moment, Sara Imenu passed away. Fast forward, Og makes another appearance, according to the commentaries in the Perashiot, at the end of Sefer Bereshit, when Yaakov Avinu comes down to Egypt, comes Paro and asks Yaakov, how old are you? We may have discussed this in the past, and we explain that what type of question it is that you see someone, the father of your viceroy, and you ask him, how old are you? So according to what I recall from that parasha, the one who actually formulated the question, it wasn't Paro. Paro said the question, but because someone else asked Paro to ask the fellow in front of them, how old are they? What prompted this question? According to the Egyptian tradition, in their lifestyle, in their beliefs, Paro was like a god for them. So the way to activate that aspect of godliness was created in such a way that anyone who needed to access to the chamber to speak to the king, the opening of the door was built according to the height of the king. It seems that Paro was a very short fellow, so automatically everyone coming into the chamber of the king needed to bow down to him automatically, because you need to fit under the opening. But in history, there were 2 times that the door frame or the doorpost expanded to accommodate the height of that individual. The first time, it was in the time of Abraham Avinu, when Abraham had an interaction with Paro. The second time around was when Yaakov, after Yosef sent them a message that he's alive, and he came to bless the king, the second time that the doorpost elevated itself to fit according to the height of Yaakov. So it seems that in both incidents, Og was around. So now let's do the calculation. If I remember correctly, the flood, the Mabul, took place in the year, I believe, 1600, since the creation of the world. We left Egypt in the year 2448. That's already 16, that's 400, plus 448. That alone is 848. And let's be honest, I don't think that Og was born that day of the flood. That took 120 years, the Teva, the ark, to be built. So we must say, and this is at the end of the 40 years of the desert, so we must say that Og must have been over 900 years. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ribono shel Olam, Master of the universe, you bless Og in an unbelievable way because he saved Lot. But let's be honest here. Who did Og actually saved? Let's do the calculation. Abraham was informed by Og. Abraham rescues Lot. Eventually, Lot becomes the father of Ammon and Moab. From Ammon and Moab, fast forward a couple of generations, we have Ruth that marries Boaz. From that marriage, Obed is born. From Obed, Ishai is born. From Ishai, King David is born. From King David, King Solomon is born. And eventually, Mashiach comes from that lineage. So who is, in plain English, the founding father of that lineage? Lot. Lot is the founding father of the Davidic dynasty, coming through the line of Moab through Ruth. Who created the scenario that Lot can be saved and will be saved? Og. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, Og, because of him we have Mashiach. Because of him we have King David. Because of him we have King Solomon. If that's the case, how can I touch him? Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, al tira oto. God says, Moshe, Rohi, listen to me. I gave Og a beautiful gift. 1,000 years almost of life. Noah, Abraham, Ishak, Yaakov, Moshe, and Aharon, plus the years in Egypt. Faige, Dayenu. This is the Peshat, the historical background of this particular final segment of the Perashah. And we know the happy ending of the story. The Pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to defeat Og Melech HaBashan and his children and his nation, and there was no basically any remnant or any savior of this kingdom, and the Jewish people started the conquering of the land of Israel. Now, with all that being said, I think that it's important to move on with a fascinating Zohar on this particular final segment of the Perashah of today. So the Pasuk says, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, al tira oto. Don't be afraid of him. The Zohar asks a very interesting question. And the Zohar, fascinating enough, brings a comment and an explanation. What is the comment? I will say the following, because what we're going to say needs to make sense. Let me just find the right page. In a different Chumash, I like to confirm what I'm going to say now. Okay, so the pasuk says, "Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, al tira oto." Don't fear him. Ki beyadecha natati oto, because in your hand I deliver him. Vayaku oto, and they smite him. Now, in every time that the Torah writes the word oto, there are two ways of writing oto. Aleph Vav, Taf Vav, or Aleph Cholam with a dot, Taf Vav, oto. Both of them are okay. But the Zohar Kadosh writes and it says, the word oto has two meanings. And I don't mean auto. Auto in Hebrew, it's a vehicle. But maybe that with a tet. Maybe somebody from Israel can confirm that later. But Oto, says the Zohar Kadosh, has two meanings. Oto means him, and Oto comes from the word ot. What is the ot? The literal meaning of the word ot is a covenant or a symbol. For example, Shabbat, Beni uben Bnei Israel, ot hi le'olam. Between I and the Jewish people, the day of the Shabbat is a day of covenant. That's the Shabbat. Or Tefillin, ve'aya lecha le'ot. That's another covenant. So we have the covenant of the Shabbat, the covenant of the Tefillin. And when I mean Shabbat, I say Shabbat and holidays. And that's why one of the reasons why we don't put on Tefillin on Shabbat is because the Shabbat is the guest of honor. That's the ot that comes once a week. So the Shabbat takes over the Tefillin. That's why there is no Tefillin on Shabbat. But there is another pasuk that says that you need to have always two witnesses. Somebody gets married, chuppah, ring, signing the ketubah, you need to have two witnesses. So during the weekday, I have the tefillin. During the Shabbat, I have the day of the Shabbat. And who is the other witness? The Zohar Kadosh says, very simple, the Berit Milah, the circumcision. That's called Berit, Zot Ot HaBerit. This is the covenant between God and the Jewish people. As we say in the Birkat Hamazon, Be'al Beritecha Shehatamta Bitzareno, on your covenant that is sealed in our flesh. So comes the Zohar Kadosh and it says, guess what? Lot Mehila, Og had Berit Milah. He was circumcised. Where do we learn that from? Let me bring the Chumash. I have it next to me. I like to have a Chumash handy. Right here. Abraham Avinu was 99 years old when he was circumcised. Ishmael was 13. And Bechol Anshe Beto comes Pasuk and it says, and all the people of his household, Yelid Ba'id, especially those that were born in his home, Umiknat Kesef, and those that were purchased, so to speak, with money, Nimolu Ito, they were circumcised together with Abraham Avinu. Comes the Zohar Kadosh and it says, do you know who was circumcised in that day that Abraham Avinu did the Berit Milah? Og, the king of Bashan, eventually. And therefore it says, Moshe Rabbeinu says, maybe going to war is a attribute of justice and judgment. Abraham Avinu and the circumcision represents the concept of kindness. If that's the case, says Moshe Rabbeinu, how can I activate judgment with someone that has a connection to kindness? I know the question is deep, but it makes a lot of sense. Comes the Zohar Kadosh and it says, listen to this answer. It says the Zohar Kadosh, guess what? Abraham, Milah, Lot, just 1 second. On that moment, Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid, and how can he uproot something done by Abraham Avinu? And Moshe had one more reason to be afraid. Remember yesterday's class? We spoke about the life of Aaron. So Aaron HaKohen passed away. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, I am Devora. Moshe Rabbeinu is a teacher. Aaron, Ohev Shalom, Verodev Shalom. He loves kindness. He follows peace. He pursues peace. So what type of person is Aaron? Aaron, says the Zohar, represented the Chesed. And Moshe represented the Gevurah, the attribute of judgment. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, if Aaron HaKohen, my brother, will have been alive, I can delegate that mission to him because his kindness and he understands what needs to be done. But how can I have the audacity of approving something done by Abraham Avinu? So comes Borei Olam and it says, hold on a minute. It says, Borei Olam says to Moshe, Al tira oto. Don't worry about the Berit Milah. Why not? Very simple. Because when the Berit Milah, and this is a fascinating lesson for every one of us, when does the holiness of the Berit Milah protects and permeates the soul of the person? When the Berit Milah is kept holy and pure. But, says the Zohar Kadosh, in the case of Og, his behavior as a man was based on the topic of immorality. And once immorality becomes a resident in the life of a person, the covenant of the Berit Milah basically is camouflaged by the power of immorality. And that's what God says to Moshe, Al tira oto. What does it mean, Al tira oto? Al tira et Og. But the Zohar Kadosh says, you know what the oto here means? Yes, literally means don't fear him. But you know what the oto means? The ot of the Berit Milah. Don't worry about the circumcision of Og. That was a medical procedure, like thousands of people in the world do, like the circumcision of the Arab nation. They do it at the age of 13. We do it at the age of 8 days old. And the reason why they do it at the age of 13 is exactly based on the pasuk that I mentioned. Abraham was 99 years old and Ishmael was 13 years old. From that pasuk that we just read, the Muslim nations or the Arab nations or the Islam religion follows that particular parameter. And therefore the Zohar Kadosh says, once that was done, then he was able to be defeated by the essence and the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom. The Zohar concludes in a most beautiful way, and it says, what a great zechut that the Jewish people, despite generation after generation, they are holy followers of the concept of the Berit Milah. As I said, the Birkat Hamazon statement, Be'al Beritecha shehatamta b'bsarenu, Be'al Toratecha shelimatanu. Fascinating enough, in the second paragraph of the Birkat Hamazon that begins Nodeh Lecha, there are two matters which are connected to one another. One is the concept of the Berit Milah, and the other one is the concept of the Torah learning. That's why it says, Be'al Toratecha shelimatanu, and the Torah that it was taught to us. My dear Kahal, we say Tiskela Mizvot to the Safdie family for the magnificent breakfast at the Edmond J. Safra Synagogue. I know that I'm not there, but I know what's in the menu for today, and as well to the Betesh family for the class Le'ilu Nishmat, the beloved father, and remember the lessons of the Para Aduma that we learn in the early part of the days. We do mitzvot because they are a godly commandment and not determining if we understand or it makes sense to us. Remember the lesson of doing mitzvot in a most beautiful way. Remember the lesson of the yoke that we discussed earlier in the week, that the mitzvot should not be considered, God forbid, a burden, but actually as a way of connecting to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Remember the lesson of yesterday about Aharon HaKohen, love the peace, pursue the peace, the only person that the Torah gives us details, exactly, not only his passing, but actually when, which day of the calendar. And today's lesson, yes, the initial fear of Moshe Rabbeinu based on one good deed that Og did close to 2,000 years ago. And that's why the Zohar comes to clarify that although this is all good, but there was one more added reason, and this is hidden in the secret word Oto, connecting to the Berit Milah. So obviously this serves for the men's department as reinforcement of the Shemirat HaBerit, the protection and the spiritual well-being of the Berit Milah, and in the marital concept, in the holy topic of Taharat HaMishpacha, the fundamental topic of family purity among Bnei Israel. We'd like to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom wherever you may be, and Be'ezat Hashem, Beli Neder, we'll resume the recording Sunday morning via iTorah.com. Shabbat Shalom umevorach to everyone.